What if Sonic was dark, moody, but still couldn't jump? Well, you'd get Shadow and this video. Much like in the previous video, we'll be seeing how many jumps it takes to beat Sonic Adventure 2. This time, however, we'll focus on the dark and last stories. And again, this video was made possible with the help and expertise of Sonic Speedrunner Dawn. All that said, the dark story begins with Eggman in his Egg Mech trumping through the gun stronghold. It's an obvious remix of Prison Lane, but with one major difference. In Prison Lane, Tails had to platform his way up through the stronghold while Eggman is primarily moving down. No elevators to jump off of, ledges to jump onto, just run, drop, and shoot. It's jumpless and actually kind of fun. On the surface, this is a copy of the Bigfoot boss fight that Sonic had, just with a different arena. The thing is, it's actually different in that Hotshot will damage Shadow no matter what, even when boss is standing still, at least as far as I can tell. As such, we cannot just roll into the mech and let physics raise us up like we did with this Sonic. I originally thought that meant that we had to jump 4 times. Thankfully, Dawn was able to do it with just 1 jump by getting onto some wooden boxes and repeatedly spin dashing into the mech, and with the right positioning and timing, Shadow can actually land back on the box and hurt the mech again and again, not letting him move, meaning this whole thing is, it just takes 1 jump, which is awesome. So Dry Lagoon is Rouge's first level. It's full of loud turtles, sand, and far too much water. It has 2 major areas. The first is a small oasis that you start in, and then there's a larger oasis that you can reach by hopping on the back of a turtle. When we arrive in the big oasis, we need to carefully run forward and glide onto the platform. If we mess up or just drop down, we're stuck in the water until we choose to drown. While this does respawn us back at the small oasis, you normally only have 3 or 4 lives, so this didn't feel like something I wanted to use as a strategy. That said, Rouge has the same sort of attacks as Knuckles that let her get into the air without jumping, so this level is doable without jumping. Though we will need to restart repeatedly until we get a good set of locations for the shards. This took me about 20 minutes, so it's not too bad. For Eggman's next level, he has to platform across the sand ocean. Much like sand in that one quote, the jumps are rough and coarse and required to get everywhere. That was dumb, but I didn't count very closely, but if played all the way through, this level would easily take over 50 jumps. Thankfully, there is a real neat glitch to avoid all that. If you navigate over here, which takes just 2 jumps, it's possible to fall off and pop a nearby balloon at the same frame that Eggman touches the sand. This makes him almost die, but not, meaning that he just floats all over. As such, Eggman can walk all the way to the end of the level, though he does need to get boosted up partway through. It's such a nice glitch. Onwards, it's time for Radical Highway. This one seemed daunting, but it's full of a bunch of radical mock bounce spots like this one, letting us avoid the whole first section of platforming. Later, we can bypass using a pulley by clipping into this metal crate and activating a spring that I honestly didn't actually know was here at first. I just sort of stumbled into it by accident. In this next section, we're expecting to make our way across a large suspension bridge. While you can float across the first half, there's no obvious way to get past the second half without jumping. While messing around, I remember that you can actually grind on the large cables. This proved to be the way through, but first a fun little revelation. At one point I landed on the cables near the center with almost no momentum, but for some reason you can actually build up enough speed to get to the top of either side by simply holding down the B button to crouch. I don't think that's how physics works, but nice. From there we run into a roadblock. Like, literally, this obnoxious barrier in the road initially forced me to jump, but Dawn proved that you can actually slip through with enough speed and proper movement. The next barrier can be rolled over using the ramp. Everything from there is mostly as usual, though at least 1 mock bounce is needed to reach the goal ring. Egg Quarters is a rehash of Knuckles' Death Chamber, but without the large circular central chamber. Much like in that one, you need to be careful not to fall in the small bit of water, otherwise you can't get out. Also, like with Death Chamber, this one is totally jumpless. And you gain the ability to dig here, which is nice. So Lost Colony is another Eggman level, but it's actually not too bad. Everything up until the room where you get the hover ability can be done without jumping. In that room you do need to jump, but damage boosting onto this box makes it take 2 jumps rather than 3. And then getting out of the room requires multiple cut corners like Dawn did back in Prison Lane. And in this room you can damage boost onto this elevator, which lets you get to the next one, where you can then hover all the way to the other side. And finally, 2 jumps are required to get up and hit the switch. We tried damage boosting with the Roomba enemies, but it just doesn't work. It doesn't get you high enough. From there, you can take this elevator to avoid jumping, hover onto this elevator, and finally damage boost with a nearby enemy's attack into the goal ring. Nice. The next level is another Eggman level, where he has to navigate through Weapons Bed. This starts on a large aircraft carrier where we can pick up the rocket upgrade. You're then expected to use this upgrade to create a 3-box staircase that you can use to get out. This took too many jumps, so I looked around and I eventually realized that we can get onto this red pipe, follow all the way to this point, and then jump hover all the way to this section. From there, Eggman can cross small flat gaps by briefly hovering, though you do need to jump hover from here to get across it up to this spring. After that, you can damage boost onto and off of the pulley that leads to the second aircraft carrier. To get past this set of crates, break the left one and get damage boosted up onto the railing. And moving forward, a jump is needed to get up to here. Again, we have a pulley, but this one is annoying because the enemy can just barely reach with its bullets, if you aggro it from the very end of its range. Also, the enemy at the top sometimes just doesn't have its missiles, which is weird. Lastly, one final jump is needed to get up this ledge, and then 2 careful damage boost gets us to the goal ring. After that, we have a boss fight where pew pew pew, the fox is dead. And then we have another treasure hunter level. Security Hall isn't too bad. No jumps are needed, but yeah, I don't have much else to say. So fun fact, the dollars seeing flying around have Sonic's face on them. I'm pretty sure that means they're not legal tender. Afterwards, it's the hotshot boss fight and arena, but now the mech doesn't actually have to touch down at any point. There are some walls you could use, I think, but no need. Just wait until it stops moving and perform Rouge's screw attack, or screw kick, either way. From there, Shadow's race through the jungle is relatively similar to Sonic's, at least at first glance. You do have to run down slopes and swing on vines, but there are vine bungee things that fling Shadow all over the place. Also, way too many wooden walls that force you to roll under. This means it's a slower, perhaps more like combat-filled level, which also means there's no pressure to jump, which actually makes it another sort of fun one, jumpless. Next, we beat up Sonic, like how Sonic beat up Shadow. Who's the faker now? And then Route 280 is much like Super Tails Kart. It requires no jumps, though it is a bit more difficult because there are plenty of gaps in the track that you can fall through or fall off of, and the timer doesn't leave too much room for crashes, but still, it's pretty simple. Sky Rail introduces propeller springs, which the game expects you to homing attack repeatedly to gain height and thus navigate through numerous ledges and cliffs throughout the level. Since we don't want to jump to start these homing attack chains, we must instead rely on spin dashing off of inclines. Good thing that there are a lot of inclines. One annoyance is that the goal ring at the very end is just out of reach from below, but again, inclines gets us there. So this boss fight with Eggman against the Egg Golem seemed a bit daunting, but it's actually easier than you might expect. You just need to damage it by hitting it anywhere and then log onto and explode the weak points that appear. Without jumping, you can't easily get to the other bigger sections of platforms, but there are pulleys that you can hover and grab onto. Taking damage can actually knock Eggman off of the pulley onto the platform, though if you do it right, you actually really don't even need to leave the main 3 platform sections, just shoot and shoot and shoot, and eventually you'll win. Mad Space is like Meteor Herd, but about 20 times more obnoxious. You're basically forced to travel upwards using rockets to get the iron boots, which allow you to open metal crates, and thus travel upwards even more. The different planetoids all have their own gravity, which makes navigation unnecessarily tedious when you can't jump. You could beat it all jumpless, but I didn't have a very good time. After that, we have a nearly identical fight to the one when we were playing as Knuckles. Beating up Knuckles is jumpless if a bit annoying. Cosmic Wall is another Eggman stage that, if played properly, would take just so many jumps. After the second checkpoint, the game has you platform all the way up a tower just to hop over the wall and drop all the way back down. It does this at least twice, which really adds up with the jumps. Near the second checkpoint, before the tower, you can actually jump and hover like so, which lets Eggman rise up over this wall and then hover all the way to the goal ring. Afterwards, we have a fight against Tails. It doesn't require any jumps, but it is important to dodge Tails' Super Ultra Azure Comet Blaster 9000, which can easily kill us. Otherwise, it's pretty simple. Now we have Final Chase, which ended up being very similar to Final Rush. It's possible without jumping, but it just took so much frustrating work to puzzle out the path. This level introduces these spinning drums that act as gravity wells. Getting on them is simple, just get close, but getting off of them without jumping can be incredibly difficult. If they don't have an end cap like the first one, you can run up and with enough momentum simply fall away from its range. Up ahead, these tubes do have end caps, which means we can't just fall off. Important note, Shadow cannot spin dash while touching any of these gravity tubes, no matter what. You can go really fast by just sort of spamming somersaults, but this isn't reliable enough to be helpful. Eventually, I found that Shadow can land on the edge of the end caps, which means you're not technically touching them, so you can spin dash across. At some point, I also found that Shadow can actually get some serious air by spin dashing into the side of a vertical gravity tube. It's not unsimilar to a mock bounce, as far as I can tell. Later, I got to a point where I couldn't reach the next gravity tube without jumping, even while standing on the ledge. While they're not actively attacking you, you can actually bounce off of these blobby artificial chaos, which is quite handy, which is what led me onto this tube. The last big obstacle was this section of tubes all near each other. There are some springs so we can get over to the pulley, but without jumping, the pulley is a trap. We can land on this end cap, then dash over to this end cap, and then spin dash use hover frames to just barely reach the cylinder. At the top, a spring gets us to a rocket, which is yet another trap. If used and you're not careful, you can get stuck on a tube that leads to a dead end with no way of dismounting. Taking the rocket and holding away from the tube is enough to reach the goal ring. This fight is very similar to the Hero version story, but it's a bit easier because Sonic doesn't abuse chaos control as much as Shadow did. I actually fell off and died more often to the controls and game being dumb than Sonic himself. As you'd expect, this fight is doable without jumping. With that, we move into the credits because the dark story is over and the last story has begun, which is just one giant mission and 2 boss fights. So the mission, Cannon Core, begins with Tails fighting his way through some very usual looking terrain. There's a new mechanic to keep track of in the form of time-stopping switches, but otherwise it's pretty simple. You either walk or fall to the end, but in the final room, 2 jumps are unfortunately required to get you up to and in front of the door that you need to destroy. For whatever reason, the falling weights here don't clip Tails up when landing on him like they do in Mission Street, which is odd. Next, we play as Eggman, which goes through the level taking an elevator up and a fall down, no problem. The only difficult spot is near the end where there is a room full of icky green plasma. You could walk across this, but it hurts a lot. Still, you can get onto and ride this block to the door. And then in the final room, we yet again have to navigate across the floor of Mountain Dew. So it hurts, but this section is jumpless. Next, a very annoying section. Rouge has to platform up the pillars, which can be done without jumping. Then hit the switch to stop time, and then fall and glide through the waterfall. Next, we have to stop time again, move forward, hit the switch to unlock the big button back where we started, and then stop time and get back to the waterfall without jumping is very annoying, and you have very little margin for error. And also, while I was doing this on my first or second try, I got through to the end, but the game decided to fling me into the water when I tried to do the uppercut, which was ridiculous. Either way, her section can be done in 0 jumps. For Knuckles' section, you annoyingly spawn in a pool of water. The only thing that gets us out is 1 single jump. Now that we're out, we can get out again, but like out of bounds. You see, the red ring around the pool of water and the wall form just the right angle and sort of space that Knuckles can sort of wiggle through and clip out of bounds. Now back in the water, we can simply swim until we start falling out of bounds, and then glide all the way to the final room and then hit the switch. Easy as that. Leave it to Sonic to have the most interesting section of the last story. We're expected to hit the switch to stop time and homing attack across the enemies to get to the other side. There are no ledges or slopes to reach the chaos or activate the bounce bracelet, but we can bounce off of the chaos. I had to swap to the GameCube version to use actual save states, but it should work the same in the PC version. After many attempts, I got it to work. I bounced off the chaos, then repeatedly homing attack to get across. Next issue is killing a blob boy suspended over a bottomless pit. This one is too high to roll into and bounce off of. It's possible that a different, more reasonable strategy is usable, but I came up with a wonderfully stupid idea that does work. So for some baseline info, Omochao is here because of course he is. Another fact, Omochao is capable of destroying objects and enemies. This works when you throw him at stuff, but also when he flies through them. Unfortunately, it's impossible to toss Omochao into Flubber without jumping, but that doesn't mean that the enemy is out of reach. Whenever you bump into Omochao, he will activate and fly alongside Sonic until he finishes talking and then fly back to his spawn point. The faster you go, the faster he'll fly. If you stop suddenly or spin dash, he'll fly far out in front of you. The strategy that worked after like 20 minutes of attempts with save states is to charge up the Ancient Light, activate Omochao, and then run away from Chaos and then run towards it. You must then activate Ancient Light and cancel it before Sonic either kills the Chaos or gets too far away. If timed correctly, this raises Sonic up, which makes Omochao go up directly into the Chaos. I was so happy when this finally worked out because it means that, for once, perhaps ever, Omochao is actually helpful. That unlocks the other door, letting us continue onwards. This room doesn't require anything special, but this one does. We can only get through by somersaulting under the fence, so we have to jump to get up the other side. Lastly, the game expects you to run down the tunnel and land in some flowing water, jump out, stop time, run up the slope. Instead, we can carefully spin dash up the wall around the boost panels, and then spin dash directly to the top of the water slope thing, and slide all the way to the goal ring. The final obstacle that stands between us and victory over the final story is the Bio-Lizard. The most efficient strategy I could come up with is to roll into the Bio-Lizard and hold A to use hover frames to get you high enough to multi-spam attack up to the weak point. That's what speedrunners already do, just with a jump at the start. We don't want to use the lizard's grind rails because we'd be forced to jump at the end. Next, since you don't have any hover frames, I waited out his attacks, and then I jumped and spam attacked to deal damage. For the next hit, I again used hover frames to get up and hit him without jumping, and then when the eggs arrived, you can roll into one, and if done right, it'll boost you up, allowing you to do the usual attack chain. Same for the next hit. And finally, everything will be floating, so just simply float to the center, land, and somersault to victory.
I'm Shadow the Hedgehog.
Servers are the 7 chaos. Chaos is power. Power is enriched by the heart. Control is the one that unifies the minds. Only you can do it. Stop the Chaos Emerald!
The final fight against Final Biohazard is one big victory lap. Sonic and Shadow go super and must take turns flinging themselves into Biohazard's weak points. This is done in zero gravity, so the A button makes you ascend while the B button makes you descend, so jumping isn't even possible. With the power of friendship, we're able to defeat the Biohazard, save the planet, and complete the game. Now that we've reached the credits for a third time, I can tell you that it takes
30
jumps to beat the Dark and Last stories. It's kind of crazy that all of this took less than Tails' Hidden Base, but either way. With that, I think it's time to finish off the video. Big thanks to my channel members for their support, and a Biohazard-sized thanks to Captain Crayfish for being a superfan. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like, maybe subscribe, and of course, go check out Dawn's channel. This video wouldn't be anywhere near as interesting without his contributions. That said, that's about it for this one. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.